The Buddha, who was he? What kind of guy was he? Why? What did he do that made it so significant that he was able to establish a religion, a philosophy, a way of life, and one of the oldest ones out there? I mean, we're talking about somebody who walked all over India about maybe a little over 2,500 years ago, and managed to establish what is considered, I believe, the fourth largest religion in the world. So let's go ahead and discuss that. Hmm. I'm going to try. I'm going to see if I can't put up some material on here for us to view. All right. Here's my stuff. All right, that's the window we want. Okay. Just a couple of the resources that I use to remind myself of the story. Let me make sure we're on the right one. And all right, there it is. So yes, this is a Wikipedia entry. Typically, I will only use Wikipedia as a resource if I can investigate the sources and see for myself that the sources used are legitimate. And while I wasn't able to check them all on this particular one, the ones I did check were good because I mean, look at all the resources that they used here, all the stuff that they cited. I mean, there's the notes, there's the references. I mean, they used all kinds of stuff to put this together. So, um, and a lot of these in here listed in here are from sutras and other, here's some other sources that were used. I mean, whoever put this together did a really good job and was really, really um, thorough. So, but we're not going to sit here and read the entire Wikipedia article because that would be ridiculous. so, so who was the Buddha? All right. Well, I guess the best place to start is the beginning. So the Buddha, he was actually born, um, depending on some of the stuff that's written about the Buddha is and there's going to be some differences. There's going to be some variation. They're still trying to pin down some specifics on the guy, but they have it broken down into ranges. So things are pretty close together here. So the Buddha himself, um, he was born. He's a human being, first of all. I know a lot of people want to say that Buddha. They think Buddha was a god, or they think Buddha was this divine magical being of some sort. It wasn't the case at all. He was human just like you and I, only lived in a very very different time, obviously. So depending on what you read, he was born. Uh, he was born anywhere. He was either born 563 BCE or 480 BCE. Um, some other Eastern texts, particularly China, Vietnam, Korea, and Japan, place his birth at 869 BC, and that's kind of derived from how they know like what year his death was, which they noted as 949 BC. But other texts will note his death at 483 BCE or 400 BCE. He died at the age of 80. Not only was he born a human being, he was born into royalty. The man was a prince. He was the prince of a. He's a prince of a. He was a prince of the what they call the Shakya caste, which was a warrior caste, in a large city, in a city called Lumbini. Lumbini would be today in Nepal, right on the northern India border. So to kind of give you an idea as to where that is, okay. Obviously, Lumbini isn't, it isn't erected anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. We are talking about a city that was ruled a long, long time ago. His original name was Siddhartha Gautama, and he was born of Maya Devi, which is his mother, and Suddhodana, which was his father. And so obviously he lived a life of royalty. He lived a life of privilege. He got, he did get the best of everything. He got, the education that was available at the time. He was really well taken care of. He exceptional training in combat. We were talking about a warrior caste, so if anything, you had to learn how to fight, and you had to learn how to be the best in the area in fighting, and that he was. He was known to be very exceptional in the combative arts. He and so he spent a lot of his earlier years only inside the palace, and that is because his father decided that he didn't want his son to see any of the sicknesses and suffering and death and old age and such outside of the palace. If any of that occurred inside the palace, if a servant got sick, they were sent away. Or started to age or dying, they were sent away. One account says that, even if the plants started to wilt, those plants were replaced, like, roses or whatever. So basically, he wanted his son to have this ideal version of life. And while they don't really specify his motives behind it, I suspect it's because he wanted to make sure that his son would stay in the palace to succeed him. So, and I think the concern came up. It was said that shortly after Siddhartha was born, a sage had visited the palace, someone that they sent for, and he foretold that the Buddha, if he were to stay within the palace, within the kingdom, he would be the greatest ruler they've ever had. However, if he ever left, he would become a prominent wise man who would spread a message that would affect the entire world. Clearly, the latter happened, and it's interesting how we got there. So, all this time was spent within the confines of the royal grounds, and as he grew older, by the time he was in his teens, he married someone who, arranged marriages were very popular at the time, obviously. So, by arrangement, he married a woman named Yasodhara. And together they had a son named Rahula. So already, not only was Siddhartha who we will know as the Buddha later on. Okay, not only was Siddhartha, you know, on his way to being a king, he had also already established a marriage and a son, so he already had succession. And this pleased his dad greatly because, I mean, this means that there's going to be some solid succession for his throne, and, the Gautama legacy will continue and continue smoothly. Um, that said, at the age of 29, Siddhartha became intrigued by what might be outside the palace walls. And he convinced his father to let him go outside of the walls. He wanted to know what was out there. He said to his father, I need to know the people that I rule over, that I'm going to rule over. I need to know what's out there. I need to know what it is I'm going to be in charge of when that time comes. And his father eventually agreed. He figured at this point there was going to be no harm in him. He's not going anywhere, So, his father said, fine, go ahead. And that's when he had his first glimpse of sickness, old age, death, and all of the sadness and sorrow and unhappiness and suffering that all brings. And he even questioned it. He, the person that took him out to escort him, to guard him, he asked about this, and the guy told him, look, this is what happens to people out here. This is what happens to everyone. This is just the natural course of things. And it moved him. It moved Siddhartha in such a way that he wanted to dedicate his life to finding out what true happiness is and how to attain it. He wanted to know how human beings can actually, truly attain happiness for all of their days, even through sickness, even through death. He wanted to know the true key to happiness. So one day he left the palace, leaving a note behind for his dad, denouncing his succession, denouncing his place, succession to the throne, and leaving a note for his wife and child saying that he did have to leave on this monastic journey because this is something that everybody needs to know, that he's doing it because he deeply loved them. He says that one day they will meet again, even if it's in death. So it was at that point that he set out with minimum supplies. So this young man at the age of 29 set out on this spiritual journey. Now, while on this journey, at this time, it was during this time that India, that area, was very spiritually open. Hinduism was still the prominent religion there. Okay, and I mean some of Gautama's teachings will reflect some of that background a little bit. Some things that are more specific. Like he mentions the like in many sutras, he'll mention the Brahmins. The Brahmins are the people who were said to, attain enlightenment enough to where they can escape the cycle of life and death, what we refer to as samsara. So, I mean, that's just one example. And I know some sutras he will mention some of the Hindu deities and such, but I don't have all those specifics with me, and it's not something that we're going to be able to go into tonight. So that'll be another discussion for another day. So yeah, so as he set out, he sat with so many other teachers, so many other um, people who simply dedicated their days to meditating all day, all night, every day, and had full on, had their ideas on, certain ways of meditating and how this is the way to attain what we often refer to as nirvana. Nirvana is a state of mind where not only do you achieve enlightenment, but you are on the path to setting yourself free from the cycle of life and death, from samsara. And so he spoke with other monks, he spoke with swamis. Swamis are priests, teachers in Hindu, um, other, spiritual leaders. He eventually settled in with a sect of monks who practiced deprivation, thinking that, the bare minimums for living, including the bare minimum on food, was the best way in order to attain spirituality. So, I mean, can you imagine being part of a group that practices consistent fasting, only feeding on, what little you may have nearby, or, maybe any seeds, perhaps even some fruit that may have fallen to the ground, but other than that, just really the bare minimums, like just enough not to keep you from starving to death. Yeah, Siddhartha participated in that, and his experiences. He took those experiences with him through his journeys. In fact, he discovered that his mind actually became clouded because he was consistently hungry. When you're hungry, when you're starving, when you're just, you know, when you're not getting enough nutrients, sometimes, for a lot of people, you begin not to think straight. Sometimes you even start to hallucinate because you're just so deprived of um of nutrients at that point. And that's what Siddhartha was experiencing. And he concluded that this really can't be, you know, the way to find what he was out here looking for. You know, he was convinced that his mind was becoming distracted because the needs of his body were outweighing the concentration that he needed on his quest. So he stopped doing that and noted, okay, this is what it's like to live without. And then he recalled his time in the palace. This is what it was like to live with everything. Okay? Living with everything in opulence pretty much kept me unknowledgeable. Living with practically nothing, kept me physically starved. And that's when he concluded that there's got to be some sort of medium somewhere, some moderation between the two that would be most helpful on his quest. And this actually, when he starts teaching, becomes what's known as the middle way. Some of you may have heard that term, the middle way, before. And that's basically what it means, not living in extremes, living in moderation. So that was part of his journey, was self-discovery. He managed to travel through plenty of India. He traveled south, actually, nearing Sri Lanka. And then one day, after speaking with all these, wise person, all these wise men, all these priests, all these spiritualists, swamis, yada yada, one day he decided that he was going to be determined to become enlightened. And so one day, he found this fig tree. And he decided, he was going to sit under this fig tree until he became enlightened. He was going to sit there, he was going to meditate until it happened. This is a bit where a lot of people get familiar with the story of the Buddha. this place that he chose would later become known as the Bodhi tree. It's located today in Bodh Gaya, Bihar, in India. And he sat under this fig tree. And how long you sat under it really kind of depends on which writings you follow. According to what's known as the Pali Canon, which is basically the scripture for Buddhism written in Pali, a lot of that being universal to all of Buddhism. According to the Pali Canon, he sat and meditated under there for 7 days. Other accounts have him sitting under that tree for 49 days. Either way, obviously this wasn't strictly straight meditation. Obviously, he would have had to take a break to maybe eat some of the figs that fell around him, maybe get a drink of something, answer nature's call, what have you. But the point is, he sat there and he spent all of his time outside of taking care of needs, meditating. And it was on that 7th day or the 49th day, again, depending on which you believe, which document you're reading, okay? He did attain enlightenment. He did attain awakening, okay? Now, there's more to the story than that. There's a spiritual side of the story that gets told a lot. The spiritual side being basically how his process of becoming enlightened was. And the story goes like this. As he was sitting there meditating, just before he attained enlightenment, in his mind he was approached by a demon named Mara. Mara is known as a dark being who was basically the master of distraction, deception, temptation. I mean, essentially, he was more or less India's version of what we in the West would call the devil, all right? But still, there's differences there. And Samara was attempting to distract Siddhartha from achieving his goal. He would tell Siddhartha things like that, he had been meditating long enough. Hey, you're there, great. Now you don't need to do all this. Hey, what about the things you enjoyed in life? What about this? Is this really all is all this really worth it? Trying to distract him from his goal. And it is said that at one point, Mara told him that it's not going to matter whether or not he is enlightened. Besides that, no one's around. No one's there to see him become enlightened. So what's the point anyway? And first of all, public display is not the point of enlightenment, all right, for one. But that's when it's said that the Buddha, that Siddhartha, took his hand, touched his fingertips to the earth in front of his crossed legs, and declared that the earth would be his witness to his enlightenment, and that the entire earth, along with all beings that are on it, would be a witness to it, and there's nothing he could do about it. And upon that declaration, it said that he resisted all of Mara's advances and essentially defeated him and had become enlightened at that point. It's an interesting story. If you find it anywhere that actually could tell it a whole lot better than I can, I encourage you to do that. It's interesting. It really is. And so once he became enlightened, he eventually became known as the Buddha. Now, Buddha's not a name. And it's another misconception a lot of people have. Buddha is not a name. Buddha is actually a title. It means one who is awakened or one who is enlightened. I think more specifically, one who is awakened. I think that's the most direct translation for what Buddha means. So, he became known as the Buddha later on in life. Um, After some inflection, after becoming enlightened, um, he chose not to continue to try and attain nirvana yet, but instead teach what he learned and teach what he realized when he became enlightened. So he began to walk. He began to travel all over India. He started picking, people wanted to start following him. So essentially, he picked up some disciples, um, and started a monastic order of his own. The monastic order he called the Sangha. Sangha is how it's spelled in English. Um, Back then, Sangha meant um, monastic group, because that's what it was. That's originally what that was. The Buddha's monastic group. Nowadays, we use the Sangha um, to mean a spiritual community. So, if you're a regular, say, at a Zen center, a meditation center, um, or at a temple or whatever, you would be considered part of that Sangha. It's like, best way I can describe it again to compare it to something that we're more familiar with. It's essentially like the congregation at a church as its own community, if that makes sense. Okay, so I mean that's how we refer to the Sangha today. Um, and as he went on, a lot of the stuff that he taught was passed down in oral tradition. So the way he taught, knowing this, the way the Buddha taught um, was mainly in lists. And in his teaching, he started very broadly, and then as things moved on, he started getting more and more specific about what he was teaching. And that's why there's like so many sutras out there. Sutras are basically documents, documents of what the Buddha had taught. Eventually, a lot of this stuff got written down, but it did take a while. Again, back in those days, literacy wasn't openly taught unless you were really, really rich, you were royalty and wanted to learn it, or you were destined to be a scribe or something like that. So, so eventually, his teachings got written down. Um, but that said, he started his teaching very, very simply. Um, One of the first thing that he ever taught, the first um, teaching that he gave, is something called the Four Noble Truths. Maybe some of you have heard of the Four Noble Truths before, um, but if you have not, maybe I can bring them up. Okay, so the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth is, it commonly gets translated to life is suffering. But what this essentially means is that in life we suffer no matter what. It exists. Even if it's old age, death, or if it's something like, we're not getting something satisfactory out of life. We're not getting something we want and it's making us miserable. Things like that. That's suffering in Buddhism covers a wide range of unpleasantries. So, life is suffering, that's the first noble truth. The second noble truth is that our suffering is caused by attachment, or is caused by craving. Craving is a better term there. Basically, much of our suffering is caused by having a continued desires for things, having attachments to things, like for instance, money. There are people out there who consistently want more and more money. You know, they may make their financial goals, and normally what happens is they find out that they want more. You know, so they continue to try and get more, and once they reach that goal, they're gonna try for more. You know, and as you can see, that attachment to money, while it will provide temporary, temporary happiness for making a financial goal, the fact that they want more means that they're not sated, they're not satisfied, and they suffer because of that. Because it's not enough in their mind. They want more and more and more. So that's basically the second noble truth. The third noble truth is that this suffering can be stopped, that we can cease this suffering in our lives. And the fourth noble truth is the method upon which he recommends that we end the suffering in our lives, and that is known as the Noble Eightfold Path. And so to go into that with at least an overview of what all that means. So the Noble Eightfold Path is basically, I want to try and phrase this right. Sometimes I have issues trying to phrase this in a way that is accurate without causing too much confusion. It is like sort of a set of rules or standards. I like using the term standards sometimes on how one lives. Okay, it's they're not commandments or anything like that. It's not something where, if you don't follow these instructions to the letter, there's a God or karma or whatever that's going to, come down, smite you, send you to hell, whatever. That's nothing like that. But this is basically the method that the Buddha taught in the alleviation of suffering, or to alleviate suffering for yourself and for others. The first noble truth is right view. Basically, having the proper understanding of things that are going on, things that are around you, things, whatever it is that you're embarking on. Being able to have a better understanding, better attitude is sort of essentially the goal there. The second noble truth, or the second, is right thought. Right thought. Being in the mindset of, being in a mindset that is not of anger, that's not of greed, that's not of, basically coming from a positive place in your mind is what right thought means. The third is right speech. Okay? Basically, right speech is not telling lies. Right speech is not being hateful with our words. Right speech is not participating in gossip. It's basically to try and speak positively, try and speak with compassion, even if it's something that you're trying to teach someone. If it's someone that if it's a debate or whatever, you're encouraged to speak with compassion, speak with some positivity. Right action. Right action. I mean, pretty much don't do things that would consider to cause other people to suffer. That actually links into something called the 5 precepts, and I'll get into that in just a moment. Noble truth Number 6 of the Eightfold Path, right livelihood. Okay, basically, don't take a job that is criminal in nature. Don't take a job that demands that you steal. Don't take a job that demands that you kill for the sake of killing. Uh, Number 6, right effort. This also translates sometimes as right energy or right vitality. Okay? Basically, right effort is putting, not necessarily working hard, not necessarily entirely working smart either, but working the appropriate amount. Number 7, right mindfulness or right awareness. Right mindfulness. Being better aware of those around you, being better aware of yourself, being mindful. I mean, just, basically being mindful, which also leads to being skillful in practice. Um, and then number 8, right concentration. Right concentration is the practice of being in the moment. This is where meditation practice falls. I know a lot of people like to multitask, like to do more than one thing, juggle things so that it's more efficient, so that I think it's more efficient. Um, Buddhism kind of discourages that a little bit because if you're working on several tasks at once, there's a chance you might screw one of them up. There's a chance that things might not get finished as quickly as you think. So, with right concentration, Buddhism basically encourages that you focus on whatever task it is that you're doing from start to finish. And that does include meditation as well. And along with that, the Buddha also taught what's called the 5 precepts. So you'll see why these tie into the right action part of the Eightfold Path. And just to be clear, the Eightfold Path isn't ordered. I mean, there is a list, but it's not necessarily ordered. You don't do like right view first, then right attitude, then right speech, then right action. It's not an 8-step program. All right. Think of it more like if they were 8 spokes on a wheel that turns. It basically, they all work together at the same time in order to keep things moving, right? So that's kind of what it is. And that actually happens to be one of the Buddhist symbols. It's called the Dharma wheel, and that's where it comes from. But moving on, the 5 precepts. So he taught the 5 precepts. Now, these are kind of significant for some Buddhists who want to better commit and deepen their understanding of Buddhism. In most traditions, particularly Mahayana traditions, there is sort of a rite where, someone wishes to, they can do what's called taking precepts, or whatever version of that there is. In Soto Zen, we call this Jukai for lay ordination, in which the 5 precepts do play a part. And these are basically essentially these are basically 5 very important points to conducting oneself. And these are some teachers will teach you that these are ordered by importance, from what causes the most suffering to what causes the least, as well as the karmic impact. And we'll talk a bit about karma here in a bit also. So, of the 5 precepts, the first one is to abstain from, let me bring this up on another document here because it's phrased better. These are how it's told in Sota Zen, but they're all worded in similar ways. So, the first of the 5 precepts is to abstain from the willful taking of life. Normally, sentient life is what is specific here. Basically, don't kill other human beings, don't kill animals, don't even kill insects. That's kind of what that means, which does make pest control kind of tricky sometimes. But yeah, basically to abstain from the willful taking of life. And sometimes that can be avoided, sometimes that cannot. Again, that's going to be depending on circumstance as well as intent, okay? So, but that's the first precept. Abstain from the willful taking of life. The second is to abstain from stealing. Don't steal from others. No theft, no burglary, none of that. Don't do it. Third precept is to abstain from indulging in sexual greed. This often gets translated as to abstain from sexual misconduct. Now, different Buddhists will interpret this differently, okay? Sadly, some more conservative Buddhists, sadly, will put homosexuality in this category. Most Buddhists, however, in my experience, don't. More oftentimes than not, indulging in sexual greed, at least for lay people, a lot of that means not engaging in sex that could harm others, okay? Particularly when consent is involved. Rape definitely falls under sexual greed and sexual misconduct. It's a big no-no, all right? Fourth precept is to abstain from telling lies, all right? It kind of falls more under right speech. But yeah, don't lie, don't fib. Always speak truthfully, okay? And then the fifth precept is not to indulge in harmful intoxicants or drugs, okay? Sometimes this gets translated as, not to partake in substances which can cloud the mind. So, for those with a more strict or literal interpretation of that precept, no alcohol, no drugs, no marijuana, none of that. Nothing that can affect the mind in any way. Others consider this a precept of moderation, kind of citing the middle way on this one. Basically know your limits. Don't drink so much that you're going to get drunk, so your judgment is poisoned. Don't smoke so much that you get so high that you don't know what's going on anymore. Stay away from the hard stuff, maybe. Basically, the goal of the fifth precept is to make sure that you're always in a place where you can think clearly. And so those are some of the most basic of Buddha's teachings. And much of what he teaches after that in later sutras tie back to these. The Buddha also taught concepts such as interdependence and dependent origination. And these two concepts kind of go hand in hand. In my study, I found that interdependence essentially means that I guess to put it in a commercial capitalistic way, I remember a slogan from a telephone company years ago. The jingle used to go, "Just call, we're all connected." That bit, "we're all connected," that's kind of what interdependence is. Basically, things that we do affect someone else, something else, in some way. It could be a very small decision, you know. Um, like me when I ring this bell, okay? If you happen to be on stream, if I rang the bell, it affected you guys because you heard it. If you were participating in the meditation, it affected you that way also because you know what the bell rings mean. Um, Me ringing this bell could have also affected my next door neighbor because I'm in an apartment building. They may have heard it. So, um, essentially, that's interdependent. That's interdependence. Dependent origination, however, suggests that nothing acts independently. This can be tricky for those of us here in the West to grasp at first, but because we define independence as being able to take care of ourselves, right? An independent person goes out, gets their own work, finds their own way to make more money, you know, feeds themselves, clothes themselves, shelters themselves. Independent person, right? In Buddhism, independence is meant very literally, meaning it depends on nothing. And that's not true of anything. Even with human beings, because when you think about it, in order for human beings to exist, we're constantly depending on stuff to do that, right? We can't live without oxygen, for example. We are dependent on the air that we breathe to stay alive. We're dependent on water, fruit, you know, food, sustenance, things to keep us alive. So, I mean, that's dependent origination, that nothing exists without having a dependency on something else. And so, again, that's just like a couple of other general topics that the Buddha taught on and is very foundational for many of his teachings later on. So, I mean, he was very good at doing that and was very good at listing them so that they were easier to digest and easy to remember. And he did this teaching. He traveled, brought, you know, his ever growing population of monks with him throughout his travels. 45 years. 45 years the Buddha did this traveling. And there are plenty of more details on his travels in that Wikipedia article that you see over here, for example. Oh, excuse me there. Over here, for example, gives more detail on that. There might be a little bit of detail on certain parts of that life of the Buddha in stories that are known as the Jataka tales. The Jataka tales, look these up because these are actually very fascinating. These actually um, are stories of morality as told from a Buddhist standpoint. But each Jataka tale is supposed to represent each of the Buddha's lifetimes. So, like from before his time as Siddhartha Gautama and afterwards. And there's always a lesson to be told. You know, there's always some sort of morale, some sort of moral of the story, a lesson. You know, if you need to equate it to something in order to better understand what I'm talking about, kind of like Aesop's fables. Okay. Um, In fact, there's actually one Jataka tale I remember off the top of my head that I think is supposed to be part of his lifetime, and it is, um, the name of the other person escapes me, and I apologize. I would have to look that up later on. But there is a story, there is a Jataka tale where the Buddha had traveled to a village, and he noticed that the village looked almost abandoned. It looked like it was, recently left behind by people, and he was wondering what was going on. It's just unusual for an entire village to be empty like that. He managed to come across a woman who was on her way leaving the village, and he stops and asks her what's going on, and she tells him there's this killer that's out there. He's been one by one killing people in the village and collecting their fingers, and we're not safe here, so we're leaving. We can't stay here anymore. And she said, if you're wise, you'll leave too. But instead, the Buddha said, actually, where's this man known to stay? Point me in his direction. And the woman does and leaves. And the Buddha goes to find this killer. He eventually does come across the killer, okay? And he's basically wearing the ring. He's basically wearing his victim's fingers as a necklace, all right? And he was contemplating, before seeing the Buddha, he was contemplating, who he was going to kill next. His finger collection wasn't complete. He needed one more finger in order to fully fill out the necklace. And then he would retire from killing. He would be content, maybe. So as he was, sitting there contemplating this, the Buddha starts walking by. And the killer's like, well, there's my last victim. I'm going to collect one of his. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to collect one of his fingers and complete my necklace. And then my life's going to be great. So he starts pursuing the Buddha. And the Buddha notices him, but he just walks past. So he starts pursuing him. All right? And as he's pursuing him, he's actually running after the Buddha. But the Buddha continues to walk. Oddly enough, the killer can't seem to keep up with the Buddha. He's sitting there running, full sprint, after him. And the Buddha's just calmly walking like he ain't even there. And this starts freaking the killer out. So he starts hollering at him. He starts saying, wait, stop, hold up, wait, wait. Will you stop? At first, the Buddha doesn't acknowledge him. He just keeps walking, just keeps running after him, and keeps not catching him for some reason. And he's thinking, what kind of magic is this? What does this guy do? And he yells again, stop. Just, I'm trying to catch up to you. Stop. And finally, the Buddha says something to him. And finally, as he's walking, he turns his head back and says, but I have stopped. Killer's like, no, you haven't. You're still walking. You're still moving. And the Buddha repeats himself. He says, no, I've stopped. It is you who hasn't stopped. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm chasing you for one. I mean, what do you mean? And the Buddha says, it is you who haven't stopped. You haven't stopped killing. You haven't stopped collecting fingers. You haven't stopped harming other people. When you stop these things, you'll have no need to chase anymore. You'll have no need and you'll be content. So it is you that needs to stop, my friend. And the killer's like, oh, wait a second. All right, first of all, he just called me his friend. I don't have very many friends. I mean, was this guy serious? And that's when the Buddha did stop walking to turn to him and say, yeah, you know, stop killing, stop causing people suffering, Instead, start showing compassion, start showing love, Let go of this need that you have to collect people's fingers, And your life's going to be more satisfying that way. And the killer gave some serious thought and thought about what he's been doing. And he's like, I do keep desiring to kill more people and collect fingers. I'm not happy. And so at that point, the killer decides that he was going to stop killing for fingers. And that's basically how the story ends. And again, that's tying back to the Four Noble Truths: suffering caused by craving, So, very interesting. It's a very interesting story. So later on in life, he was said to have made it to a place called Kushinagar, and this is where the Buddha was going to remain for the rest of his days. Not too many days more, because this is where he passes away. He passes away giving a couple last teachings. One of those teachings being that you should test what he teaches. See, this is one of the most interesting things about Buddhism, that this is one of the most interesting things about Buddhism, is that the person who's actually teaching is actually telling people to test his teachings for themselves. Not necessarily to take him at his word, but to try them out. And if something else is proving to work, follow that truth. I think the Buddha knew that times change, and sometimes with new discoveries, with new enlightenments, politically and socially and whatever, times change, and everything he teaches might not always be accurate for that situation. So that's one thing he taught. And the last thing, it's documented, it says the last thing that he taught to his Sangha says here that the Buddha says that the Sangha will prosper as long as they hold regular and frequent assemblies, meet in harmony, do not change the rules of training, honor their superiors who are ordained before them, do not fall prey to worldly desires, remain devoted to forest hermitages, and preserve their personal mindfulness. It's basically, there's some more strict rules for monastics that are involved. Not stuff I'm going to go into in this discussion. They said that his final words are all sankharas, which means formations, or that which is put together. All sankharas decay. Strive the goal with diligence. Strive for the goal with diligence. It was said that upon his death, he was actually buried in different parts of India, under special burial sites that are considered, sacred temple areas, all throughout India. But that, my friends, is essentially the Buddha, who he was, from birth to death. And ever since then, people have been carrying his teachings with them, now for centuries, literally millennia. And it's interesting how we got to how different teachers teach us teachings, the different sects in Buddhism, how things, how things separated, how things, how things came to be. Um, from the Theravada, which is considered to be the most orthodox of Buddha's branches, to the Mahayana, which tends to be more accessible to people, is actually the largest chunk of Buddhist beliefs around the world. This is where Zen falls into this, Pure Land Buddhism falls into this, Nichiren Buddhism falls under this, Chan Buddhism falls under this. Um, some say Tibetan Buddhism falls under that. Others will say that falls under a third branch called Vajrayana. And it's and that's actually quite interesting. And we might actually discuss the history of Buddhism at another date and another time. Now, what time is it? That's about 2 hours. Okay. All right. So cool. Well, before we go, before I kind of wrap this up, there's a video I'd like to show you that kind of gives a similar overview. Unfortunately, some of the information that's in it is probably dated a little bit. So it may not be 100%, but it's pretty close. Let's see. Give me just a second, I'll pull it up. Oh gosh, and you know what? I forgot to change this to chanting. I'll go ahead and do that right now. Even though it's going to be like that only for a few minutes longer. Okay. Let me have a look. This was kind of a last minute decision, so bear with me. Hey, Cassedrian, how's it going? No problem. This is going to be kind of a regular thing on Sundays. I'm going to try and teach a little bit from what I know, but the idea is for all of us to become more knowledgeable, to be, and for myself and anyone else in the stream, for us to kind of study together. Awesome. Well, thank you for lurking and listening. That's really cool, man. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Here we go. I'll pull up this video here. Hopefully y'all will be able to hear it and hear it just fine. We're about to find out. Alright. There we go. Alright. Video. Let me adjust this window so that it's not bleeding out the screen. There we go. Alright. Much better. I kind of like how this person explained who the Buddha was and the very basics of Buddhism, and does so in a very entertaining way. This is an Irish fellow that likes to explain a lot of this stuff. Very neat. Cogito is the channel, so if you want to check that out on YouTube, go for it. I think I was in the middle of reviewing this to get some detail. I'm gonna have to. It's spelled. Oh my gosh! Hold on. No. That was weird. All right. It's spelled Cogito. Theater mode. That's what I wanted. I don't think the sound's coming through like it's supposed to. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can't rectify that right quick. Can you guys hear that okay? Some called that hermit a sage, others a soothsayer. Stupas, that's what they're called. The word under that is the Pali word for this teaching. Hey, Rich Mozzie, how are you tonight? Mr. Beast, thank you very much for the follow. Um, Unfortunately, I'm not going to be playing random YouTube videos. That's not really the focus here. I've already kind of picked the material that I was going to use in our topic tonight. I will have a look at it later, though. I appreciate you submitting. In fact, this is probably going to be it here. Credit to Cogito again for that. Oh no, Beast, it's okay. I mean, I'm glad you asked. It's cool. Um, so yeah, credit to Cogito for that video. He actually went into a couple of concepts I never went over when explaining who the Buddha was, and because it's not something I wanted to go into quite straight away. Um, but yeah, things like nothing is permanent, which is actually a common teaching in all of Buddhism. Impermanence, everything changes. Mr. Beast, I appreciate that very much. I'm glad you're enjoying the content we're putting out. You have a great day as well. And I hope I get to see you again very soon. Thank you. So yeah, I mentioned things like that nothing is permanent. That's impermanence, which means everything changes in some way. I mean, we as human beings are constantly changing, even if it doesn't seem like it. So, but again, that's another topic for another day. The concept of no self is also kind of another concept that we can go into and study together on another day. It can be a little complex, but basically, the concept of no self means that the self we identify with is tied to what we call our ego or our persona, which is entirely based on opinion. And that's kind of what drives. And that opinion is what drives who we think we are in reality, but is not actually reality. We'll get a better handle on that topic again another Sunday. Because some of these concepts require a deeper discussion. And like this gentleman said, there's no way to go over everything in one tiny video. So yeah. Some of the information in there though might not be terribly clear also. When he was talking about the differences between Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism, I think some of his language may have been a little confusing. So in both types of Buddhism, everybody considers Buddha to be human, and pretty much strictly that. However, when he says that there's more emphasis in Mahayana in some traditions on, godlike beings and such, that's something that's probably going to get discussed at another time also, because some people put heavy emphasis on what they consider deities or divine beings. That's when we get into discussions regarding, like the Tara, which are basically deities that are representations of Buddha's, different aspects of the Buddha, as well as different aspects of, or his ties to some of the Hindu gods. There are some traditions that believe that there's a tie there. He mentions nothing about karma, which karma is it's very misunderstood here in the West. A lot of people regard karma as this sort of supernatural cosmic system of justice where things that you do can bite you in the butt later on, and while I think it's amusing to to make some humor of it, that's not exactly what it is. It's a little bit more complex. It's not exactly that. So I kind of try and stay away from any interpretation of karma like that. So again, another discussion for another time. There's a lot of simplistic concepts that get sort of complicated in order to understand them appropriately. And I mean, some of this stuff I don't fully understand. I mean, I should probably put this as a caveat at the beginning of the video, or at the beginning of our stream here, but I myself am still a student, okay? I'm not a priest. I am not, I'm not Dharma transmitted, which is why I give Dharma discussions and not Dharma talks. There's the semantics there are kind of important. Um, but discussions also lend to offering input and exchange, which is part of the reason for this. I'd love for there to be open exchange on things that we discuss, questions to be asked that we can together hunt for the answers if we need to. And that's kind of the point of that's kind of going to be the point of Sundays here on this stream. So, but other than that, like unless there are any questions or anything that anybody wants to go deeper into, that kind of concludes my concludes this discussion on the Buddha and who he was.